Ah, the finish. It's the final touch to all of your hard work and a thing of beauty when it's done correctly. But when it's not, it can mean a lot of extra work and a dissatisfied customer. So, what do you need to know to ensure that the finish turns out like this? Well, that's what this program is all about. We're going to take a vehicle with a panel repair and show you what you need to do to refinish it. There are actually 4 stages to the refinishing process. Preliminary preparation, which includes things like evaluating the existing finish and color matching. Surface preparation, getting the vehicle ready to paint. Applying the final finish, and the final detailing. Let's take a look at each one of these stages and see what needs to be done. We'll begin with preliminary prep. Okay, let's assume that the basic plastic and metal repairs have been completed and it's time to prepare the vehicle for the final finish. There are 3 important words you need to remember. Clean, clean, and clean. This means inside and out. Any dust or dirt that remains can contaminate the final finish. Thoroughly power wash the entire exterior. Be sure to get in and around the trim and door handles, windows and trunk lids, any place dirt can get trapped. Power wash the undercarriage, under the hood, the wheels and wheel housings. Rinse the vehicle and let it dry. Next, apply a wax remover and degreaser. Spray the degreaser on all surfaces to be refinished and wipe it off. Paint will not adhere to a surface with wax, silicones, or grease. Now you're ready to evaluate the existing finish to see what needs to be done. Basically, in order to refinish the vehicle, you must have a stable surface for the paint to adhere to. Look for any cracking, blistering, or checking, a condition where the cracks go both ways. Erosion of the original finish, called cratering, or evidence of rust. If any of these conditions exist, you must remove the old finish before you can apply the new one. In repaired areas, check to make sure the surface is completely smooth and blemish-free. Check for waviness, pinholes, sanding scratches, or any other imperfections. Painting magnifies existing blemishes, so if you don't find and correct them now, you'll have to redo the job later. One other thing to check before refinishing is how much paint buildup exists on the vehicle. Typically, a factory finish plus 1 additional refinish is slightly under 12 mils or 12 thousandths of an inch. Paint buildup should be limited to 12 mils. If it becomes thicker than this, the paint has a tendency to crack. Devices like a pencil mill gauge can be used to check finish thickness before, during, and after refinishing. The magnetic end of this pencil mill gauge is placed against the metal body. As it's slowly pulled away, a reading is registered. This gauge shows 6 mils. A digital mill gauge works almost instantaneously when it's held up to the metal panel. This gauge shows 4.7 mils. No problem adding another finish to this panel. Before refinishing, you need to find out what kind of finish the car has and match the color and the type of paint. The new finish will be determined by what's on the car now. At the bottom of the vehicle ID plate, you'll see a code for the type of finish used. The code for the exterior paint color is listed here. The ID plate is located on different places for different makes and models of vehicles. If you're unsure where to find it, you can consult a crash book like this one. This is the Bible for finding all kinds of information on different makes and models of cars. Once you know the type of finish and have the paint color code, you can get the formula from the paint manufacturer or the paint mixing system you're using. The formula tells you how much of each different color ingredient is needed to duplicate the original factory color of the vehicle. Paint colors vary slightly from batch to batch, even with precise measuring and mixing. And over time, a vehicle's finish can fade. So you need to create a test panel to check the color match before you refinish the vehicle. It's a good idea to do your paint matching before you complete your repairs and surface preparation. That way you'll have the paint you need when you're ready to apply it. Mix your paint according to the formula, but only in the quantity appropriate for the job to be done. A tinting guide or the manufacturer's paint formula will specify the proportions. Mix the paint well. Paint also needs to be thinned to decrease its viscosity or thickness. If the paint is too thick or viscous, it won't flow or atomize properly. If it's too thin, it won't cover and it'll tend to create drips. Pour the paint into the spray cup to the paint line indicated. Dilute the paint by adding thinner to the thinner line. The type of thinner used depends on the type of paint. Mix the thinner into the paint and attach the cup to the spray gun. Use the spray gun at a 90-degree angle or perpendicular to the surface of the test panel. Spray in even overlapping strokes, keeping the gun perpendicular to the surface during each stroke. Continue until the panel is lightly coated. Wait about 5 minutes, the paint's flash dry time, and apply a second coat. Keep the gun moving during each application. Continue applying coats in this manner until the color solidly coats the test panel. Next, clean and reload the gun with clear coat enamel. You'll only be coating half the panel, so you'll need to mask off the half that will not receive clear coat. Apply 2 clear coats to half the test panel. Allow about a 5-minute dry time between them. When the test panel is dry, compare the clear-coated side to the vehicle's existing finish. You'll use the side of the test panel without clear coat for color comparison when you're applying the color coats to the vehicle. If the paint doesn't match, a color manual will give you suggestions on how to alter the paint color to more closely match the vehicle. Prepare another test panel using this altered formula. Prepare a plan for refinishing. Specify what needs to be done to each area of the vehicle. Now you're ready to prepare the surface for refinishing. Areas of loose, cracked, or blistering paint must be removed. This can be done with a chemical stripper, through abrasive blasting, or with a grinding wheel. Carefully mask off areas that are not to be stripped to protect them, and remove any trim from the target area. Chemical stripper is best used to take off large amounts or multiple layers of paint, but be careful, it can get trapped under trim and ooze out later to ruin the final finish. Use a chemical stripper only when other means are not feasible. Blasting with abrasives will quickly remove loose paint and reveal any underlying rust. Abrasives that can be used include sand, plastic beads, soda, even walnut shells. But blasting with sand may damage thinner steel panels, aluminum, or plastic. Using soda, walnut shells, or plastic media instead of sand makes blasting safe for all surfaces. One final way to remove old paint is with a grinder. This method works best on flat and gently curving areas. Begin with a 36 to 50 grit sanding disc to remove the bulk of the finish. Hold the grinder at a slight angle to the surface and move it back and forth. Finish with an 80 grit disc. Sanding is probably something we do more than anything else in auto body repair, especially when preparing for refinishing. So you should know a little about the different kinds of sandpaper, sanding techniques, and safety. Always wear a dust mask and safety glasses when sanding or grinding. Grind so that debris flies away and not toward you, and work in a well-ventilated area. Dust from old paint, primers, and sealers can be really harmful if inhaled. Sandpaper comes in various grits and in dry or wet varieties. The smaller the number, the coarser the grit. For example, 40 grit sandpaper is coarser than 180 grit. If a paper says wet and dry, it should only be used for wet sanding. The water keeps the paper from clogging and extends its life. Generally, you want to select the finest grit paper that'll do the job. If you use coarser paper, it may work faster, but then you have to sand out deeper scratches. If you don't sand them out, the scratches will show up in the final finish. To remove metal scratches, first sand with 80, then 180 grit paper. This can be done by hand or with a power sander. The next task to prepare for refinishing is to clean the surface with a wax and grease remover. Remember, paint will not adhere properly to any surface containing wax or grease. Spray on the degreaser and wipe it off while it's still wet. Be careful not to touch any of these areas with your bare hands. The oil from your skin can compromise the final finish. Any bare metal must be treated with a self-etching primer. Self-etching primers promote paint adhesion and provide corrosion protection in one application. Next, we'll apply a primer surfacer. Now, we've mentioned primer surfacer before in this program, but what exactly is it and what does it do? Primer surfacer, or just surfacer, is the workhorse of our industry. It fills in scratches left by sanding and grinding and other little imperfections in the body filler. It also provides a good base for adhesion of the finish coats that follow. In this magnified cross-section diagram on the surface of a sanded panel, you can see the rough, uneven grooves left by sanding or grinding. When surfacer is applied, the grooves are filled in. When it dries, surfacer must be sanded to remove any high or low spots. This can be done by hand using a very fine 400 grit sandpaper or with a power orbital sander. Generally, use a power sander when you want to remove large amounts of material and hand sand for finer finish work. Both methods can be done either wet or dry. Every area that's to be painted must be sanded or scuffed to improve adhesion of the new finish. This can be accomplished by wet sanding using a very fine 600 grit waterproof paper or with a nylon scuffing pad. The smoother the surface, the easier the refinishing. One way to determine if a surface is smooth and level is to use a guide coat. Dry guide coat is a fine, dark-colored dust. Use a pad to pat or smear it on until the surface is coated. Then hand sand with a flat rubber block and 400 grit paper. A high spot on the surface will show up because the guide coat is sanded away before surrounding areas. In low spots and scratches, the guide coat remains while it is removed in adjacent areas. These high and low spots will need to be corrected before applying a final finish. Where a newly repaired area meets the old finish, feather edge to make a smooth transition. Feather edging means gradually tapering one finish into the other. With successful feather edging, if you run your hand over the area where the two surfaces meet, it'll feel perfectly smooth with no indication where one surface ends and the other begins. Once you're satisfied that the surface is properly prepared, thoroughly clean the vehicle again and remove all traces of dust and dirt. Remove the old masking material. Blow dust off panels and out of crevices. Then wash the vehicle with a mild detergent and dry it. Blow out any areas where water may be trapped. Do a final wipe down with a wax and grease remover. Now you're ready to mask for the final finish. Any part of the vehicle that's not receiving a new finish must either be removed or masked. When you're planning a spot repair, especially with a multi-stage finish, any trim that can be removed should be. Multiple finish coats around trim pieces build up a considerable edge, which is more likely to crack or chip later. If the piece cannot be easily removed, then mask it. There are several types of masking: masking paper and masking tape, plastic sheeting, specially shaped masking covers, and liquid masking material. These masking materials are especially made for automotive use. Don't substitute products bought in a paint or hardware store. They'll fail the demanding requirements of an auto body application. A dispenser like this automatically applies tape to one end of the masking paper. This makes the job of masking much easier. Masking plastic and tape can be dispensed in a similar fashion. Hold the masking tape and paper with one hand, apply it with the other. Use tape without paper to mask off smaller details such as pinstripes. Stretch tape slightly as you apply it to fit around curves. Also, when masking windows, begin by masking the edge and moldings with tape, then mask over the tape with masking paper and tape. The top masking paper should overlap the bottom. Be sure whenever you mask to cover the part completely, but don't overlap onto areas that are supposed to be finished. You can remove paint from surfaces that were not supposed to be finished, but you cannot successfully add paint to areas that were unintentionally masked off. There are four major considerations when applying the final finish: a clean environment, temperature and humidity, light, and ventilation. A properly maintained paint booth provides control over most of these areas. First, it's separate and sealed off from the dustier environment in the bodywork area. It has its own ventilation system that filters out dust and paint from the air. Most paint booths have their own lighting system with a daylight correction, so you can see what the paint will look like under outside daylight conditions. Temperature and humidity are often less controllable. For best results, paint on days with lower humidity and a minimum temperature of 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Paint just won't flow properly below 60. Safety is extremely important when spraying finishes. Always wear a respirator and hood during a painting session. Many paint products are toxic when inhaled, and you don't want paint clogging up your lungs and respiratory system. Some respirators are simply filtering devices, while others provide a supply of fresh air. You should also wear a paint suit and gloves to protect your hands and clothing from the paint overspray and to keep out dust and other shop contaminants that may be on your clothing. You'll be applying the finish with a spray gun and compressed air system. Let's see how it works. The spray gun has a connection for the compressed air. We're using a gravity-fed, low-pressure system with a disposable paint cup. There are different kinds of paint systems, but they all produce the same effect: supplying paint to the gun. The gun itself combines the paint with the compressed air. When you pull the trigger, the paint is atomized as it comes out of the nozzle. Atomization is very important to the success of a paint job. It means that the paint is formed into a cloud of tiny uniform droplets. When applied to a vehicle, these droplets flow together to form a continuous film on the surface. Before painting the vehicle, you got to test the spray pattern. You may need to make some adjustments. Hold the gun 6 to 10 inches away from a piece of test paper. Pull the trigger back all the way and release it. A long, slender pattern should appear. Then turn the spray cap sideways 90 degrees and spray the pattern horizontally. This time, hold the trigger down longer until the paint begins to run. Look at the runs. If they look like this, the gun is properly adjusted. If your spray pattern looks like this, the air pressure is too high. Decrease it and test again. If your spray pattern looks like this, the pattern control adjustment is closed. Turn the pattern control knob a half turn and retest. If paint droplets are too big and coarse, close the fluid control knob slightly or increase the air pressure until the problem is corrected. If not enough paint seems to be flowing and the spray seems too fine, increase the paint flow using the fluid control knob or decrease the air pressure until the spray is properly adjusted. When the spraying system is working properly and the color has been successfully matched, you're ready to apply the finish to the vehicle. We'll begin with the most common refinishing job, a spot repair. As soon as the vehicle is in the booth and the doors are closed, use a tack cloth to wipe down the area to be refinished one more time to remove any remaining dust. In a spot repair, we don't refinish the entire panel. We'll apply color to the repair area and then gradually taper it out to blend with the existing finish on the rest of the panel. Remember, the existing finish must be properly scuff sanded in the area to be blended so that the paint will adhere properly. Before painting, put on a paint suit, gloves, and hood with respirator and air supply. Be sure the air is turned on to your respirator and the booth ventilation system is on and operating. Before the color coat, a sealer must be applied to the repair area and slightly beyond. The purpose of the sealer is to improve the adhesion of the new finish and to keep the finish from soaking into the porous surfacer, causing color or texture variations. Begin your first color coat across the repaired area and extend it slightly beyond. Keep the gun perpendicular to the surface of the panel and move it back and forth in overlapping strokes. Allow this coat to flash dry, about 5 minutes, before applying the next color coat. Apply a second color coat, overlapping and extending slightly beyond the first. Use your wrist to fan the gun so the paint will be thinner at the edges. Continue to apply color coats in this manner until the spot repair is solidly covered with color and the color is tapered out into the existing finish. The base color coat doesn't have to be applied to areas with acceptable existing finish. Clean the spray gun and load it with clear coat enamel. To complete the finish, apply 2 clear coats to the entire panel. Allow about 5 minutes flash dry time between coats. Normally, this procedure will make the new base coat blend and match with the old. Bake the finish for the time recommended by the paint manufacturer, and the vehicle is ready to leave the booth. When you've completed refinishing, be sure to clean your spray gun. If it's properly cleaned and maintained, a spray gun will provide years of trouble-free operation. One other thing to remember, when finishing plastic parts like a bumper cover, you must add a flexing agent to the clear coat. If you don't, when the plastic flexes, the finish can crack. Inspect the new finish for any imperfections. There are 3 possible problems: dust, texture, and runs. Dust shows up as little nibs sticking out of the clear coat. Texture problems like fish eyes can be caused by not matching the existing texture or having texture where there shouldn't be any. Runs are drips. All 3 of these problems can usually be solved with a little fine sanding followed by a 2-stage buffing process. This final finishing process is accomplished with a buffing system where all the components are designed to work together. There are various brands available. Just make sure you use the same system for the entire process. If you substitute products during one step or another, you might not get the best result. Let's begin with dust nibs. Use 1200 to 2000 grit waterproof sandpaper to wet sand the nibs. This final color sanding can be done by hand or with a dual-action power sander. In either case, you must use a special interface foam pad that will keep you from removing too much of the finish as you sand. Once the nibs have been removed, you'll need 2 stages of buffing to restore the shine. Rubbing compounds are substances containing fine abrasives. When rubbed on the surface, they'll remove cloudiness and produce a low surface gloss. You can apply the compounding by hand or with a power buffer. Hand rub when the area is small or hard to access with the power buffer. With the power buffer, use an interface pad and a wool buffing pad and some of the compounding paste. If properly done, this process will remove the cloudiness from sanding and bring the surface to gloss. Remove the remaining compounding residue with water and a sponge and dry with clean towels. Stage 2 buffing can be done using extra fine finishing glaze by hand for small areas or using a dual-action sander for larger areas. Apply the glaze to the surface, then buff with a buffing pad. This polishing step will remove any residual compounding material and any marks left from the buffer. The final polish will bring the finish to high gloss. Apply wax to the buffing pad and use the DA to apply it. Then wipe dry with a clean, soft towel. Runs and larger imperfections can be handled in a similar fashion. For runs, first use a run file or razor blade to remove some of the excess paint before color sanding. Then wet sand by hand with 2000 grit or finer sandpaper. After sanding, follow the two-stage buffing procedure shown previously. Unwanted texture in the final finish is another problem that can be solved with color sanding and the two-stage buffing process. To smooth out unwanted texture, begin by wet sanding by hand using 2000 grit or finer paper. Be careful not to remove texture where it's needed to match the existing finish. Complete the job by using the two-stage buffing process. Be sure not to remove too much texture if you're trying to match an existing textured finish. Before returning the vehicle to its owner, thoroughly clean it inside and out. Remove any masking material. Reattach any trim, windshield wipers, and other parts that were removed for refinishing. Remove any overspray from areas that were not intended to be refinished. And use chassis black to blacken wheel openings and other areas of the undercarriage that may have been hit with overspray. Inspect the vehicle one last time and correct any remaining paint problems, problems of cleanliness, or missing equipment before returning the vehicle to the customer. Like any task, your skill and efficiency at refinishing will improve with practice. There's lots of nuances to learn, but keep at it and you'll get great results in no time.